Protect women's sports. That's what the Trump administration is demanding of California while threatening legal action if they don't. And the president wades into New York City politics, slamming the man likely to become Gotham's next mayor. Trump doesn't like his political stance or his face. Plus, son of a beach, the New Jersey lifeguard who nearly got taken out by a runaway beach umbrella. Those stories and more today, Thursday, June 26th. I'm Caitlin Becker, and this is the New York Postcast. There's a fight brewing on the West Coast over Title IX. The Trump administration is accusing the state of California of violating the law by letting biological men compete in women's sports and use women's locker rooms. Now, Title IX, which was signed into law by Nixon, bans sex discrimination in schools and educational programs. The Civil Rights Office is giving the California Interscholastic Federation 10 days to reverse its policy, or it could face, quote, imminent enforcement action, and that may mean turning the case over to the Department of Justice. Here is what the Department of Education says that the Golden State must do in order to avoid punishment and ensure federal funding. Quote, adopt biology-based definitions of the words male and female. Now, it also demanded that the CIF restore any state titles or awards that they claim were misappropriated by male athletes and give them to biological females. Now to the latest on Iran. President Trump announced that U.S. officials will meet with their Iranian counterparts next week to discuss what's left of the Islamic Republic's nuclear program and what relations with America will look like going forward. In the meantime, President Trump is already taking a victory lap. Here he is at the NATO summit on Wednesday.
That hit ended the war. I don't want to use an example of Hiroshima. I don't want to use an example of Nagasaki. But that was essentially the same thing. That ended that war. This ended that with the war. If we didn't take that out, they'd be fighting right now.
Now, what Iran's nuclear capabilities are at the moment is still yet to be determined. President Trump claims that the U.S. strike on the Fordo nuclear facility left 900 pounds of enriched uranium buried under 300 feet of debris. But there were theories based on some satellite photos that the material he mentioned there had already been moved out ahead of the strike. But the president said that isn't the case. However, the director of the International Atomic Energy Agency said that his team doesn't know where the uranium ended up. The Israeli Atomic Energy Commission said that the strikes were effective and that the setback was, quote, many years. But leaked preliminary damage assessments from the U.S., reported by CNN and the New York Times, estimated that U.S. strikes only set back Iran's nuclear program by a matter of months. The search is now on for the, quote, low-level paper pusher who disclosed that little bit of information. And back in the U.S., border czar Tom Homan is making some shocking statements about the fate of migrant children who he says disappeared under the Biden administration. Homan told The Post that recent ICE raids have uncovered, quote, thousands of migrant children and saved them from pedophiles and other exploitations. Now, speaking on our sister podcast, Podforce One, Homan told The Post's Miranda Devine, quote, we rescued victims of sex trafficking, and 2 weeks ago, we rescued a 14-year-old that was already pregnant, living with adult men. Now, he added that some of those kids were forced into servitude on ranches and farms. However, some of the children, Homan said, were, quote, perfectly fine with their families. Now, his agency is currently searching for hundreds of thousands of additional minors who are unaccounted for. The Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General found a whole host of unaccompanied children that the agency says were essentially lost by the Biden administration, and that some were placed with potentially dangerous sponsors who didn't get adequate background checks. Now to our big story. President Trump has waded back into New York City politics, criticizing the liberal darling who is likely to be the city's next mayor, Zohran Mamdani. Now, he beat a bevy of Democrats, including former Governor Andrew Cuomo, who had the backing of several prominent business leaders. But Mamdani did not get a lot of time to celebrate this victory before he found himself on the business end of President Trump's Truth Social account. The president had some choice words for Mamdani, who he referred to as, quote, our future communist mayor of New York City, before trashing his looks, his voice, and his intelligence. Now, across the aisle, some Democrats fear that their party has just been lost in the wilderness ever since the president beat Veep Kamala Harris. Now, Mamdani's win may be a signal to Democratic leadership about the kind of candidates who could succeed nationally. So for more on this, I'm joined by New York Post reporter Vaughn Golden. Vaughn, let's face it, by any metric, the last election was a disaster for the Dems. And since then, there's been a pretty big question about who will lead that party, progressives or moderates. So is this an indication that the party as a whole is moving farther left?
I think generally speaking, look, Democrats as a whole, I think, are lost in the wilderness right now. So really any sign of a path out is going to be considered right now for them. We look at this election, and one thing I think is particularly interesting to pull out of the data that we're starting to see is the sheer amount of new voter registrations between last year's general election and primary. There were 23,000 of roughly new registrations in New York City alone between that time. So I think based on at least some of the Democrats that I've talked to today, those powerful establishment Democrats whose priority is holding on to their power, they're going to have a hard time looking at some of those numbers and some of Mamdani's success in New York City and not want to find a way to replicate it. While there's a few Democrats, at least here in New York, Congressman Tom Suozzi, Congresswoman Laura Gillen out in the suburbs, you really also don't see the moderate Democrats screaming from the rooftops right now, touting their line, saying they're against Mamdani at this point in the game.
But of course, the question also is, what does that look like in a wider sense? We know historically New York is a really liberal city. So are New York City voters a good stand-in for American voters more broadly? Or is it really that this was just the first test?
Right. I mean, I don't think a vast majority of Democrats nationwide would necessarily see themselves in your standard Park Slope hipster, but we've obviously seen sparks in New York City before, looking at Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 2018. And the wave of extremely liberal candidates and the socialist movement that followed after that. So even while Democrats across the country might not see themselves in the voters of New York City, things that start here have a way of spreading. So I don't think that's something that Democrats should necessarily take for granted.
And one New Yorker in particular did not mince words. The president, strong words there. So do you think President Trump's social media posts will have an impact here?
I mean, we'll see. I'm not sure how much, one post necessarily is going to move the needle. But I think what we're seeing from Trump is definitely going to be emblematic of Republicans moving forward. I think Mamdani just handed Republicans a fantastic punching bag for the foreseeable future. And we've already seen Republicans tying other Democrats, especially vulnerable Democrats like Governor Kathy Hochul here in New York, to Mamdani and a socialist in a very, very high profile position in a very well-resourced media market. And he's not hiding either. So I think what we're seeing out of the president is going to be a move for Republicans moving forward as we move into the general election with this race and some very competitive midterms next year, including some very impactful ones here in New York as well.
So we will have to wait to see the national ripple effects here. Vaughn Golden, thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And now to a big old mess. The already disgraced social media influencer and Netflix doc Curiosity, who goes by Liver King, is in trouble again. This guy is a piece of work. His real name is Brian Johnson, and he's in hot water right now for making alleged terroristic threats at none other than podcast bigwig Joe Rogan. Now, Liver King is called Liver King because he promotes this wacky diet of raw meat and organs. And listen, the guy is ripped. But shocker, he was basically canceled in 2022 when it was revealed that, surprise, his physique didn't actually come from eating liver. In reality, Liver King was Juice King. He bulked up thanks to $11,000 worth of monthly steroids. This week, the YouTuber was in Joe Rogan's home state of Texas, and he went on an unhinged social media rant against the podcaster, challenging him to a, quote, honorable fight, but brandishing what looked like 2 guns as he did it. Now, Rogan doesn't even know the guy, and he's never even had Liver King on his podcast, but he has discussed him and that steroid use. Not to be deterred, even after he was put in handcuffs, Liver King's Rogan rant continued. And finally today, Jersey Shore meets Final Destination. So if you're like me and you love the beach, you no doubt also share my fear that a gust of wind will send someone's giant beach umbrella rolling through the crowd like a tumbleweed and stabbing me to death. Well, let me tell you, that nightmare scenario pretty much happened to a lifeguard in Asbury Park, New Jersey this week. A runaway umbrella ended up impaling the young woman under her left shoulder, and it was protruding about a foot out of her back. First responders actually had to use a saw to cut the umbrella so the poor lifeguard could even fit in the ambulance. Now, she was transported to a nearby hospital, and excellent news here, she will make it through the ordeal alive. Even after all that, I still kind of need a beach day. That's it for us today. For more on these stories and everything you could possibly want to know, check out the New York Post in print or online. And don't forget, like and subscribe to the New York Postcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. You will be glad you did. I'll give you the headlines, the gossip, the drama that you need to start your day.